You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. This is your host, Koku. I'm a little bit late because I was dealing with some technical difficulties. It seems like Google has done something where they've logged me out across all the different logins that I had. And thus, they made it difficult for me to get everything set up so that I could present this paper tonight. So please forgive me if I sound a little bit discombobulated. It's because there's so much different things I had to fix last minute, right? So I apologize. Thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. We're going to have a kind of interesting reading tonight. Should be very interesting. I see people on Twitter have been talking about they're going to be tuning in. They have the interest based on the title, on the topic of the paper. So we should have some people in here tonight. Discussing the goings on of this paper as we read along. Hey, before I go further, make sure you guys hit the like button. I've been seeing instances of having a certain amount of concurrent listeners, but only a third of you are clicking the like button. Those likes actually help people find the video, right? There's an algorithm at play here where, more likes, even though it's a small channel, more likes, the merrier, right? It helps other people find the channel, and it lets people feel like, well, there's a valid reason to listen. So make sure to tune in, to hit the like. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button, as well as the bell icon so that you can be notified when I'm online again. I'm usually on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Right, but click the bell anyway to be notified when I upload new content. Quick reminder, this show is a part of a podcast network called KWAZ Radio Podcast Network. There are other shows on the network that you should check out. For example,
this is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Also, make sure to check out the Queen's Council Podcast. The Queen's Council Podcast just dropped a new episode. I think it was Monday, right? They just dropped a new episode. Make sure to tune in to the Queen's Council Podcast as well. Council Podcast, Queen's Council Podcast. Okay, my playback is coming through the phone. Okay, so let's get into the paper. Seemed like there was more people here before I started, but whatever the case, let us get into the paper. So the This paper is titled The Meaning of Kemet, Ancient Egyptian History for Contemporary African American Experience. It's by ASA G. HILLIARD, the Honorable ASA G. HILLIARD III. A revolution in the study of Kemet, Egypt, a native black African civilization, has been in progress. It began slowly during the closing decades of the 19th century. It has accelerated markedly during the past 3 decades or so. This revolution can and will have great meaning for African Americans and for people of African descent all over the world. 2 important concepts are the foundation of considerations about the meaning of Kemet. These 2 concepts are fundamental challenges to traditional Egyptology and to racist scholarship associated with the European colonial period. The concepts are these. 1. Ancient Kemet from its beginning and during its greatest periods of cultural development was an indigenous black African civilization. Its birthplace was inner equatorial Africa. 2. Ancient Kemet remained at its core culturally unified with the rest of ancient Africa. African cultures had more similarities than differences. African cultures had more similarities than differences. As a result, Kemet must be considered as an African classical civilization. Kemet is the name of the country that was used by the ancient African people in what we now call Egypt. It means the black land, or the land, or the black people of the land, right? You guys remember, I had a discussion with Cambone, right, about this very thing, and you guys should go and check out that episode. It doesn't sound the greatest, but you can still make out what was discussed. You guys should still go and check it out. Right. As a result, Kemet must be considered as an African classical civilization. Kemet is the name for the country that was used by the ancient African people in what we now call Egypt. I know I read this before. It means the quote-unquote black land, or the black people of the land. The currently accepted date for the beginning of Kemet is about 3100 BC. This nation was founded by a king from the south who unified the northern or lower part of the land with the southern or upper part of the land. The Nile flows from the south to the north. The Nile flows from the south to the north. We had this discussion, and I see that this discussion comes up a lot recently about the map, and that the map that we have been traditionally given is the false map, and that the real map is upside down. Right? The real map is upside down, which is interesting. But according to the map, the Nile River flows from the south, right, of Africa to its north, right? So upper and lower corresponds to the flow of the river being from south to north, all right? 12 native African dynasties were in power for more than 1,000 years. This included the Pyramid Age. At least 2 or more of the most important dynasties, the 18th and the 25th, were initiated by kings from the south. Kemetic civilization, the earliest recorded, lasted for nearly 3,000 years. Some scholars have divided the history of Kemet into 30 dynastic periods, the last being a period of Greco-Roman political domination just before and after the time of Christ. It was after this period, or more precisely, it was after the time of the first councils at Nicaea in the 4th century AD, that knowledge of ancient Kemetic civilization was lost to Europeans. Let me read that one more again. It was after the time of the first councils at Nicaea in the 4th century AD that the knowledge of ancient Kemetic civilization was lost to Europeans. This was due primarily to their sustained systemic efforts to destroy the remnants of Kemetic cultural forms, which have been strong influences and which remain as powerful influences on European culture, even during the period of Greco-Roman political control of Kemet. Sorry, I had to drink some water. Over a period of 200 years or so following the councils at Nicaea, the Romans gradually succeeded in closing the Kemetic temple, universities, and destroying the Kemetic priesthood or professoriate in an attempt to declare their total intellectual and spiritual independence from Africa, right? So, you know, this just goes to what Dr. Bobby Wright would call the psychopathic nature of these people. Like, just all of a sudden, well, maybe not all of a sudden, but at some sudden point, these folks just decided that to hell with all that African influence, right? We've got to mute that noise, and ultimately we're gonna have to destroy these people because we don't want it to be that they taught us something. That's just nonsense. I mean, that just tells you the kind of folks you're dealing with. But then you have to understand how they dealt with each other. We talk about it all the time on the show. You have to understand how they dealt with one another to understand the nonsense that they brought to us. To continue, the revival of widespread European interest in ancient Kemet began with Napoleon Bonaparte's conquest in 1798. Napoleon is said to have taken nearly 200 academic specialists with him. These specialists were given an opportunity to study various aspects of Kemetic history and culture, ancient and modern. Perhaps the single most important outcome of this scholarly attention was the discovery at Rosetta, on the mouth of the Nile, stone that proved to be the key to the decipherment of the Medunetter, or what they call hieroglyphics. I think I have a paper that talks about the Rosetta a little bit more. I'll try to find that paper and present it here. I see we have a couple of people have joined in. You guys make yourself known that you're here. Make sure to hit the like button. And if you're new here, hit the subscribe button and the bell as well. Right? Let me continue with the paper. The credit for this decipherment in 1822 is given to Jean-Francois Champollion Lejeune. After Champollion, it took years to translate the vast ancient writings to be found on the walls of temples, tombs, monuments, coffins, and on papyri. That work is not yet completed. Therefore, it can be understood why it would be in later decades of the 19th century, before the stunning impact of those translations on the interpretation of the influence of Kemet on Western and world civilization would be revealed. The more Kemet was studied, the more astonishing were the findings that showed its culture to be antecedent to developments in world science, religion, education, art, architecture, etc. And this is why I have such a problem with our people too. Like, we just sit back and let these folks do the work, right? We let these folks do the work as opposed to us gaining the prerequisite knowledge and going in there and deciphering this stuff ourselves, right? We know the Arabs who have taken over this area, we know they don't care a goddamn about any of it. They only really keep it around, honestly, because of their religious ties. They only keep it around because it actually enriches them through tourism, right? So this is where power comes into. But even before you have power, you know, something we don't talk about, you have to have knowledge, you have to have interest. And we got to start getting knowledgeable and interested in deciphering these things ourselves. I see there is some activity in the chat room. Kevin Care, the reliable Kevin Care 42, is here. He says the problem is the traders that enables these outsiders. Once the traders are cast out, the wounds will heal. We got Grand Pooba in the building. He says, hi, Grand Pooba, I haven't seen you around in a while. Grand Pooba goes on to say, we have to be taught. Well, then go ahead and be taught, right? Let's go ahead and learn what we have to learn. right? Let's go ahead and do the study. And we have people who have done the studying. That's the crazy part. Like I spoke to Obadell Cambone some months ago, who told me he went himself and studied the hieroglyphs, right? The Medjugorje, right? We got to get more schools of that. All right, we got to get more schools of that. Grand Pool goes on the side, pop in and out sometimes. I'm around. All right, Grand Pool, that's good to know. But it's also nice to see you guys in the chat room and to bounce ideas and stuff off you. So that's why I say I haven't seen you around in a while. We got the always reliable KW Don 7 is in the room. Peace to you, brother. And Grand Pool says, make it our culture. Yeah, it is our culture. We have to make it a part of our learning. Let me tell you something. Let's take something like hieroglyphs. I was reading something recently, and I know that the poet Nora Zeal Hurston, I think is her name, she echoed it a long time ago. She said that the African person thinks in pictorial. The European is more literary, right? If you take the African child, right, and you get them, and in fact I have a book on this too, I forget the title of it, but it's something along the lines of like hieroglyphs for babies or something like that, right? You get these kids out here working with the Medjugorje, right, from a young age. Trust me, a certain percent of those kids will grow up to be the people who want to head to Africa, want to head to the land of Kemet and decipher what's on the walls. I'll probably do a better job than what the Europeans do with their pompousness in thinking that they could decipher what's on those walls. And then not only that, but then we'll have the people who will take the time and look at the languages that radiate off of the Medjugorje, the African languages, right? We have to do that. You know, we have to do that. Brown Pooba says, yes, make it the curriculum they teach in schools, right? Absolutely agree. But your enemy is not going to make that part of the curriculum. Your enemy is doing everything in the schools to dumb down our people. They're not going to make this a part of their curriculum. You have to make it a part of your curriculum. All right? Kevin KL42 says the black youth is the future. Absolutely. And you got to give them what they need. Like, some people call him a coon. I'm not sure what he did. But like the physicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, you know, he said something that I always, you know, he said this before I had kids even. And I always remember that when I started to have children of my own, which is, when it comes to children, you just got to give them the tools. Give them the tools and just get the hell out the way. I will add, and I'm sure he meant this too, give them the tools, show them how to use it, then get the hell out the way. Right? That's all. That's what we really need to do. Right? And so we need to start working on producing the tools, right, that our children will use, and then just get the hell out of the way, and you'll see the differentiation amongst our youth. And you'll see our youth go into all these different fields and be great and make those fields work for our people. Right? No longer would it just be rapping and basketball and all this old shit, but it'll be, you know, guys will be in Afrofuturism, they'll be in, so, you know, quote unquote Egyptology and all this kind of stuff. I see Nikki Wren is in the building. Nikki Wren, hello to you too, peace. Glad to see you. I like to see when folks are regulars around. Kevin KF42 says, study the culture around Egypt. You will see the similarity in hair, food, clothing, jewelry. You do not see that in Eurasian cultures, absolutely. To continue, absolutely. Beginning with W.E.B. Du Bois, there was a gradual growing African-American awareness of the greatness of Kemet and of the fact that Kemet was a civilization created by Africans who were black people. From that time, numerous African American scholars have extended the study of Kemet. Many European and European American scholars also began to lift the veil of ignorance and to destroy racist ideas about Kemet and the role of Africans in it. You see, that's the thing. You guys ever watch a TV show like, and it's like there's like a court scene, and someone blurts some shit out, and then you know there's like an objection, and then the judge tries to tell the jury, now, you know, strike that from the record, you know, ignore what was just said. The fact of the matter is, you can't ignore what was said. And the same thing was done with Kemet, right? They told their lies, they lied to their people, talking about Europeans now, told their lies, lied to their people, and that ship has sailed. You can't change their minds about it. In fact, I don't even want to waste my time trying to change their minds about ancient Kemet and who were the people, who did that land belong to, etc. Right? But also on the flip side, that's what you want to do to your people. You want to blurt out the thing, right, to your people, and watch these white folks try to say, hey, you know, strike that from the record now, like, objection, right? But it should be too late. Your people, your children especially, should already snatch that up and run with it. You gotta start working on that type of propaganda. You gotta start working on putting those images out there. And I'm talking about as individuals in your homes, with your families. You have to start pushing the narrative. And you have to push the narrative harder than the schools can push the narrative. Kevin K42 says, I'm definitely not European. They cannot stop our rise, right? But our rise is predicated on all the work that we have to do, right? I want to thank everyone who's here. I see more people have entered into this live stream. I want to thank all of you who are here. Make sure to click the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, click the bell to be reminded when I'm on. And in the chat room, let me know what you think of this paper so far. Let me know how you feel about Kemet in your personal lives, right? To continue, perhaps no single scholar has had the impact on the recent direction of traditional Egyptology as has Sheikh Anta Diop. Almost single-handedly, he took the traditional Egyptological establishment in a frontal assault on cherished presuppositions about Kemet as a white or non-African civilization. This multidisciplinary genius led the fight to reconstruct conceptions of Kemet. His original research in history, linguistics, archaeology, paleontology, and other and other disciplines, and his synthesis of a vast field of interdisciplinary literature has had its telling effect. For example, Diop even developed a simple chemical test to determine the melanin content in the skin of a mummy as a way of determining its race. Well, that killed them too. That killed them. The mummies he tested from the Marietta excavations proved to be black. While many Egyptologists struggle to hold on to old conceptions of a non-African Kemet, they have been forced by the data to give up much ground. You see, that's what you want to be. You want to be Sheikh Anta Diop in your families. I'm not saying you necessarily have to create a chemical test, but I am saying you got to take on this propaganda, the European, Eurasian propaganda. You have to take it on with your own research, right? Your own understanding and your own facts. In the chat room, I see Grand Puba says collectively. I'm guessing, yeah, I'm guessing he's referring to as a collective, we must do this work ourselves. KW Don 7 says Neil deGrasse Tyson is married to a Yoruba female. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that's why he gets the criticism. Oh, he's one of those guys. But I just mentioned a guy, Sheikh Anta Diop. I used to say Diop until someone corrected me. Sheikh Anta Diop was also married to a white woman, right? And so, again, and you know, this kind of proves a point too. Like, I get the disdain for misogynists, I do, but what I said that Neil deGrasse Tyson said didn't really change. Didn't change for me now knowing he's married to a white woman. You see what I'm saying? You gotta sometimes just take the game, right, and forget the player of the game, right? Nowhere in this more in evidence than in the recent volumes on ancient African history, which were developed under the auspices of the United Nations Educational and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, which is a scam artist group, by the way, by an interdisciplinary group of leading scholars from all over the world. Anyone who compares the writing of some of the authors, traditional Egyptologists, of chapters in the UNESCO publication with almost anything that those authors had written previously will see the shift towards Sheikh Anta Diop's thesis of a black African Kemet. Most notably was the failure of Diop's opposing scholars to make any points in a UNESCO-sponsored debate held in Cairo in 1974. The debate centered on the origin of the ancient Egyptians. The results of that debate are best summed up by the official commentator's remarks. Quote, although the preparatory working paper sent out by UNESCO gave particulars of what was desired, not all participants had prepared communications comparable with the painstakingly researched contributions of Professors Sheikh Anta Diop and Obenga. There was consequently a real lack of balance in the discussion. Right? It is necessary to set forth here a more fully developed list of certain operating assumptions which determine the framework for the discussion that follows. It is not possible to discuss each of these assumptions in detail in this paper. However, a number of authors have done so previously. And here are the assumptions. Number one, mankind, hominids, began in Africa, near Lake Nyanza, now, known as Lake Victoria, nearly 5 million years ago, and was dark-skinned. Kemet, or Egypt, is Africa's oldest recorded classical civilization and the world's oldest civilization. That's assumption number two. Number three, Kemet is a child of Inner Africa, which is true. Right? Kemet is the grandchild of Ethiopia, if I'm not mistaken. Right? Egypt, number four, Egypt, like the rest of Africa, began as a black civilization. Number five, Kemet is the world's second oldest recorded nation. Tasseti in Nubia is currently documented to be at least 200 years older than Egypt. Number six, indigenous Africans were driven from Egypt by various invasions occurring after the 12th dynastic period, circa 1783 BC, right, settling in other parts of Africa, including West Africa. Also, many other migrations of Nilotic and Equatorial Africans throughout the millennia. 7. Kemet was a major influence on world civilization and is the main parent of Western civilization. Number 8. Ancient Kemet is culturally unified to the rest of the African continent. So you could see where 8 and 6 are tied together. And if you were with us back when we used to do the book club discussion with Carl Hezekiah. I haven't seen Carl Hezekiah around in a minute. But when we used to do the book discussion with Carl Hezekiah, when we had the book club, you know that Walter Rodney talks about that in his book and several others, the idea that when Egypt fell, or Kemet fell, a lot of those people ran inwards, right, down to the south of Africa, across to the west. This idea that they somehow went to goddamn the desert or something is just nonsense, right? These folks went to different parts of Africa, and with them they carried, right, a lot of the culture. So that's the cultural unification of the rest of the African continent to ancient Kemet. In the chat room, Nikki Wren says, "Oh wow, I did not know that either. Sleeping white." Yeah, a lot of some of these guys, Kwame Nkrumah, and all these folks, you know, have slept white. You know, it's just crazy. All right. So let's bring this a power paper called "The Uses of History and Culture." Before I get into that, I just want to ask folks who are here, who are in the Discord, have you guys been checking out the bookshelves in the Discord? It's a slow process, but you'll notice that there's some uploads occurring in the Discord. If you guys have books on Kemet, ancient Egypt or Kemet, your books on hieroglyphs, the Medjugorje, etc. I have a few that I haven't got to put up yet, but if you have some, or whatever books you have that are African-centered, you have them in a PDF format, pass them along to me and I'll post them into the Discord. You know, we should be accumulating resources, books for ourselves and for our youth to read. I've put up a couple of coding books for certain. I have some books on music for children, because I'm also a musician. So, you know, whatever you have, pass it along to me, right? And I will put them up. That's for you guys who are in the Discord already, right? If you have books, if you actually have the PDF of a book, send it to me. Kevin Care 42 says, look up DNA tribes. They did a DNA of the Amana mummies and came back with African DNA. Yeah, I mean, it's undeniable stuff, you know. And the DNA, but that's the thing. You see, those of us here might pay attention to the outcomes of DNA studies, and that's cool that we are on top of that. But our people out here, our people, you know, who are milling about out here in society, they're not paying attention. And they don't understand what it means. What does it mean for ancient Kemet to be the land of the blacks? They don't understand what that means. And I think for the adults who are out here doing the dumb stuff, you might not be able to get through to them. That's fine, right? But if you can get it through your children and your grandchildren, that's really who you need to get it to. At this point, the adults are the adults. The few of them that you get, you welcome them, you bless them. But you really want to get your children going forward in mass, right? Collectively, in totality. You want to get all of them on board with this understanding of where they come from. Don't look at your situation now and think that this is all you can be. But understand that there's people. You need to point out and identify who these people are. There's people who are working hard for you not to be able to return to who you were. And that's the message that we want to get across. So this section is called The Uses of History and Culture. History and culture play central roles in national development. Bam. Right? Bam. History and culture play central roles in national development. That's why I'm hell on these folks out here who are talking about they're from some plantation in America and that they were indigenous somehow to America. If you think about what's being said in those kind of statements, that means you're a loser several times over. That means you had the land and you let these white folks come and gyp you, as we used to say in my hometown, and gyp you of your land for a couple of deeds, since you're the indigenous Indians here, right? Then you were enslaved on top of that. And then some of the Mongoloid Indians came along and enslaved you too. It's just nonsense. That's why I'm hell on that stuff. In fact, I watched a clip today from a grifter. I guess the grifter was doing, popular grifter was doing a Instagram live. And he had the title of the video is something like a bed wench reform bedwench or something like that. And the grifter, looking at the lady on the screen with him, he's trying to, you could tell the machines are turning, the clock is ticking. He's trying to make this grifter Caribbean. And so one of his early questions before he went in was, what are you, Caribbean or something like that? And it turns out she's, you know, what they call a foundational Black American. Mississippi, right? And you could tell the grifter was stuck at that point. The grifter was stuck. That's one of your people doing that. Herschel Walker, right? And ADOS and FBA was out there in the reparations discussion the other day talking about, no, Black folks don't. And if you heard how Herschel was talking, my God, right? My God, right? But that stuff is failure. That whole thing, that division that's being created and has now wedged itself in our reality is failure. You want to get back to your history, your true culture, right? And that's what you're going to develop going forward to continue. They also play central roles in the lives of cultural groups within given national boundaries. The leadership of nations and groups, especially viable nations and groups, is almost always acutely aware of the importance of history and culture. You're not going to be a viable nation or a viable group if your only link is to a plantation. I see I lost a few concurrent listeners. That's fine, right? I'm going to speak truth to power here. This can be understood in part when we examine internationally the tremendous national, state, and local investments in facilities, in faculties of history in schools, in museums, in monuments, in holidays, and in symbols. This is especially true in the United States. This is why they're hell on you knocking down these statues. And they tell you, that's our culture. Right? Nevertheless, the guys whose statues you're knocking down were actually traitors to what will become the United States, but they say that's their culture. The attitudes of national governments toward history and culture is not casual. Often the teaching of history is required by law. Desirable cultural activities are supported by the provisions of financial resources. Example, the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And using legal and financial resources to support the development and retention of history and culture, governments make selected history and culture legitimate. Let me read that again. In using legal and financial resources to support the development and retention of history and culture, governments make selected history and culture legitimate. At the same time, the mainstream's neglect of a particular history and culture may tend to minimize its significance unless independent efforts are made by minority or powerless groups to initiate activities to support their own heritage. That's us, right? That's us. We have to put in that work, right? Just making sure you guys can hear me. Okay, good. Seems like we're good. All right. Israel is a modern-day example of historical and cultural rescue, and of using a rescued and refurbished history and culture as a basis for building a national identity for Jews throughout its diaspora. For example, Hebrew was virtually a dead language. All right? That's why when I see you Israelite guys out there, I just shake my head. It was virtually a dead language. It was largely a reading language for priests or rabbis. The remnants of this ancient language were insufficient to serve as a fully operating modern language. This is why I like to read. All right? Yet through the efforts of a single individual, the language was literally recreated Although there were English, French, Chinese, and many other national languages that serve as the lingua franca for hundreds of millions of people worldwide, the state of Israel opted for a language that was spoken by few people in the world. Clearly, a national interest took precedence over the apparent practicality of selecting an existing international language. Y'all think about that for a second. Y'all think about what these folks did. These folks took a dead language, right? Resurrected it and made it the language of their people. All these other languages were out here and established, like they say English, French, Chinese, all this other shit was out here. These guys went and said, nah, we going biblical. We go into something that only a few people knew, priests, rabbis, that kind of thing, right? People who were reading those old texts, I guess, right? And they recreated it, and they made it their thing. You see. You're telling me we have Swahili spoken by millions of people across the continent, right? We have other languages as well. And we can't pick up one of them and make that our second language, depending where you are, second or third, fourth, fifth, whatever. If you notice in the Discord, I have books on colloquial Yoruba, colloquial Kiswahili. I had a plan, and I had some people who was working on it with me to do a separate show where we do conversational Kiswahili. I would still like to bring that to the fore, but I need more people to jump on and be producers for that show. As a matter of fact, let me put it out here. If you want to be a producer on a new show idea I have, where we do conversational Kiswahili, you want to be a producer, which will allow you to be present during the recording of the show and learning, right? You'll be one of the learners as well of the language from someone who speaks Kiswahili. If you want to be down with something like that, you could type one in the chat room or one in the comment section, and we'll get in contact and we will discuss it. We will discuss how to go about doing this, etc. But it's something that I want to really get done at some point during this 2021 year, right? And you guys let me know. It's something I'm thinking to host it on exclusively on the bbtumi.tv. So if you're interested, type one in the chat, one in the comment section, and we'll go from there. I'm looking for about 5 people. All right, this is an opportunity for you and I to learn from a Kiswahili speaker, right? You know, the language, and we could start adding a second language to what we do to continue with the paper. An extremely negative example of the function of history and culture at the national level is found in the Union of South Africa. The Dutch, who now rule, were dominated by the British politically and culturally. Their history and culture was suppressed. The culture, especially the language of the Dutch, was stigmatized with tremendous negative impact on the psyche of the Dutch people. Quote, in other words, the Bond's primary motivation was to prevent the disappearance of the Afrikaner volk as a separate political language, social and cultural entity. The identity of the Afrikaner had to be ensured at a time when economically and culturally impoverished, he was faced with the threat of being swamped and absorbed by the strong English group, which at that time regarded this as an inevitable process. Although the Constitution of the Union of South Africa entrenched the language rights of both white groups, and although in law members of each group enjoyed full equality, in practice the Afrikaner was in many ways a second-class citizen. More bitter for the Afrikaner than the fact of physical inequity was the English attitude of superiority, arrogance, contempt for the Afrikaner and his language. At that stage, Dutch was still the only other official language and would only be replaced by Afrikaners. It was the time when many Afrikaners' school child came home with tears in his eyes because he had been punished by the unilingual English teacher for daring to speak Afrikaans on school grounds. Such punishment not infrequently included walking around with a board slung on your neck, which read, "I am a donkey, I spoke Dutch." Right? I think I read this quote in another paper recently too. Right? After Dutch wrestled control of South Africa from the British, they did not stop at the establishment of political totalitarianism. They invested vast resources and energies in establishing a cultural totalitarianism as well. Government control of every aspect of South African cultural life has been ironclad and complete. Political value of the sports program, the arts, education, religion, the Afrikaans language is clearly understood by the broader bond, or the brotherhood, a secret group of South Africans who control the nation. Okay, that's interesting. That control was and is calculated and is a key part of the foundation of the present social order. Let me read that last part again. Government control of every aspect of South African cultural life has been ironclad and complete. The political value of the sports program, the arts, education, religion, the Afrikaans language is clearly understood by the Broederbond, or the Brotherhood, a secret group of South Africans who control the nation. That control was and is calculated and is a key part of the foundation of the present social order. Leaders of all nations are conscious of the powerful function of culture and groups. They take greater of lesser actions to capitalize on it as a political resource. At home, it strengthens national unity. Abroad, it has been used as a weapon to subdue militarily conquered peoples. No conqueror has won a final victory over any people until their memory or history and culture was destroyed. Bam. Bam. That's the final nail in the coffin. Right? When you start to say you are the other, when you start to become a jingoist and you're raising flags of your conqueror, right? That's when you've been destroyed. All wars of conquest ultimately are cultural wars. All wars of conquest are ultimately cultural wars. Conquerors must erase the memory of conquered people. They prevent the practice of indigenous culture. They change names of conquered peoples and places. They destroy or stigmatize the symbols of conquered people. Look around you. Are you a part of a conquered people? This is for the chat room, which has gone cold, right? But are you a part of a conquered people? As Fanon has observed, these actions are not accidental. They are the outcome of careful study of human group dynamics. Nazi thing, like, are we studying other groups around us? Are we carefully studying other groups around us? Successful conquerors know that history and culture is the jugular vein and Achilles tendon of a people. Right? The ubiquity, so this brings us to a section called Claims on Antiquity. Greece is Europe's classical civilization. Right? The ubiquity of Greece and Rome in the European, and if, in fact, let me check the chat room for a second. I see Kevin Care 42 says, in spirit, no. In spirit, no. In spirit, no. I don't know about that, because I'm looking at what's going on right now in the States here amongst the different groups of black folks, and I see a group that's championing, right, to be wholly American, right? That is talking about, you know, like this guy from ADOS, Tone Talks. He's talking about, well, we have, you know, culture that's closer to our European masters. Dude, like he's advocating that he and his people, quote unquote, are closer to the European master than they are to African people. They're looking at their DNA tests and looking at some 30 or 40% European or whatever it reports to them. And they're fixated, by the way, 30 or 40%, by the way, and they're fixated on that 30, 40%. They're fixated on that 30, 40%. In the chat room, I see more activity. Nikki Ren says, no, we are not studying other groups. Too busy trying to get them to accept us. Absolutely. We're not studying these groups. We're not studying group dynamics. Right? I was talking to Kevin K42 the other day. He was pointing out to me how, you know, there's one Asian lady, and I posted this question on Facebook. There's one Asian lady, forgot her name now, Huang or something, Karen Huang or something. You know, it's talking about Asians are being attacked. You know, the attacks on Asians have risen 1,900% or something like that, right? Which is just crazy, right? And she brings up BLM and all this old stuff like that, right? She's tying these concepts she's trying to say black people are the ones really doing it, right? But my question is, why is she doing that now? I mean, we've seen all these videos at the start of the pandemic with Africans getting their ass whooped in China and all kind of stuff like that. We've seen the stuff here in Brooklyn where black women are being beat up by these store owners, right? But all of a sudden now, there's this talk about Asians being brutalized and the hint, wink, wink, by black folks, right? And now you got the Bidens and all them trying to create executive orders, if not creating executive orders for these Asians' protection. My question is, what's coming down the pipe? What is this leading to? And the thing about that question is, it means that as a people, we are not studying the group dynamics of Asians. Right? We are not studying the group dynamics of Asians. We are not understanding what are they getting at. Right? Not just here in the States. We need to understand that, especially what are they getting. I mean, we can tell what they're getting at, but what are they really getting at in Africa? What are they getting at in the Caribbean? You know, what are they getting at globally? In the chat room, Kevin, KW7 says Yurugu wants to be everyone in history except for the virus that they are. Absolutely, I agree 100%. Kevin K42 says today a Hispanic man was arrested for shoving some 5'3" Asian lady in Queens. Right? Hispanic dude, right? But blacks will get the blame for doing this stuff to them, right? KW7 says there are only a few of us who know that we are colonized and want to achieve true liberation. Amen, I agree. Right? Kevin K42 then posts a link to the Queens Bakery assault. So you guys can click that link there and check it out, right? So again, this brings me to this section of the paper called Claims on Antiquity, Greece as Europe's Classical Civilization. What I'm going to do here, as we're about at the halfway mark of the paper, I'm going to pause here for a station ID. I'll be back on the other side.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
And also make sure to check out the Queen's Council podcast as well. So let's get back to this paper where we're discussing this part of the paper called Claims on Antiquity, Greece as Europe's Classical Civilization. The ubiquity of Greece and Rome in the European and European American historical and cultural image needs no documentation. This is true even though there is little historical justification for many non-Greek or non-Roman Europeans to identify so closely with classical antiquity. Indeed, they did not always do so. For most of the period of Greek and Roman rule, there was no Europe as such. Northwestern Europe was considered to be the hinterlands. Later it became politically advantageous and psychologically satisfying to assert a strong cultural connection between all of Europe and the classical Greco-Roman world. In this case, the use of history and culture was carried on based on assumptions that bore little relationship to the truth. Yet the claims on antiquity serve vital social and political functions nevertheless. So this section now is claims on antiquity. Kemet as Africa's classical civilization. In the chat room, Kevin Kerr says something interesting. He says, one thing I can credit the ancient Greek and Roman historians is that they told the truth about ancient Black Egypt. Because at that time, there wasn't, when they were selling that truth, they were learning from Kemet. And at that time, they didn't have the need for the propaganda machine yet. It was later when they wanted to exploit and destroy, right? That's when they created the propaganda machine, which is crazy to think that you went from, talking well about and highly about Egyptians or Kemet, Africa as a whole, and then you had to create these narratives. I remember as a kid looking at some of the drawings as an art student, looking at some of the drawings that they would draw about Africa, about all these golems, these monsters and stuff in this dark continent. And they would show that to their children in Europe. And so they were able to convince their kids based on these drawings and stuff like this was a bad place. This was a place that we had to go in there and put down our foot and put down some control. Right? So, again, the propaganda machine changed everything for them. In the chat room, Kevin Kerr says, Herodotus said 2 doves were released, one white, one black. The black dove went south, and the white one went north to Europe. So this brings us to a section called Claims on Antiquity, Kemet as Africa's Classical Civilization. It says, Egypt will play the same role in the rethinking and renewing of African culture that ancient Greece and Rome played in the culture of the West. Unfortunately, even in the 1980s, it is necessary to deal with the fact that supposedly enlightened people hardly are aware of the physical presence of Kemet on the African continent. More serious, however, is the fact that the ancient Kemetic population is often not seen as an indigenous Black African population. The evidence for a Black African Kemet has been accumulating for some time. In recent years, the floodgates have been opened and the data were overwhelmingly in support of Kemet as a Black civilization and as a child of Kush or Ethiopia. Many people see Kemet as alien to the rest of Africa. Sheikh Anta Diop provided the scholarly foundation to refute that notion. But more than that, Diop gave evidence and a framework for binding the history and culture of East Africa to the whole of the culture of the continent, and by extension to its diaspora. Job described and documented the cultural unity of Black Africa. The recognition of that unity is an important step in understanding the meaning of Kemet for African Americans, African diasporans throughout the world, as well as African continentals, are the legitimate heirs of the world's oldest classical tradition. Let me read that again. I think that's important. If you have kids, let them hear this part, especially African Americans, African diasporans throughout the world, as well as African continentals, are the legitimate heirs of the world's oldest classical tradition. Moreover, this tradition lives today in part and is available for rescue and reconstruction in light of today's realities. That's what we got to be putting forward to our people, particularly our children. All right. We must also recognize that Kemet is the world's oldest recorded classical civilization. As such, it influenced world culture. We may use Europe as an example, as the following section will show. For that, let me check in with the chat room, folks. I gotta come up with a name for the chat room for the Bitter Medicine podcast. You guys can help me with that. Well, what's a good name? All right, instead of me saying the chat room, folks, what's a good name for the chat room? Kevin Cares active. He says, remember, Europe is named after the character Europa from ancient Greek tales. Zeus became a bull and had sex with her, bestiality. Pyramids in Nubia, present day North, South Sudan, predates the pyramids of Giza. Yeah, that's why I said, like, it's Ethiopia to Sudan. Is it Ethiopia, Sudan, then Egypt? Right? There's a lineage there. All right, and if you go to Ethiopia, you'll find some of the oldest pyramids around. Right? Sudan, older pyramids. Right, and then so what was happening was, it seems to me, based on the little I've studied about it, it seems to me that the people were building upon previous or prior knowledge. Right, you go Ethiopia, Sudan, there was people building off of prior knowledge, until in Egypt they had it down. Right, and so that's why the Egyptian pyramids are these big monuments. Right, by the way, anytime a European wants to argue that they built some damn pyramids, ask them where's the pyramids in Europe. You see, we can give you the first primitive pyramids that were built, right? And we can show you the trajectory, right, on how we improved upon the science to build the great ones in Giza, right? But you guys can't show me a pyramid in Europe. Kevin Care 42 says, look up Queen Tai. There's anthropologist named Matilda Anthropology that said she looked Eurasian, the nerve. All right, and then Kevin Care posts a link for you guys who are watching the show live or in the playback. You can click that link as well and see what he's referring to. Once again, I want to put out the call there. You guys have books on ancient Kemet, PDF, formatted, or what have you. Make sure to send those over, or yes, send those over to me. I'll post them in the Discord so that we could, expand the bookshelves or the libraries that we're building in the Discord. So we had this section of the paper called Claims on Antiquity, Kemetic Claim on Greco-Roman Antiquity. Recently, Martin Bernal, professor at Cornell University and grandson of Egyptologist Sir Alan Gardner, has written a penetrating analysis of the history of our ideas about Greek history. He has identified two theoretical models to explain the history of Greece and its relationship to Europe. The quote-unquote ancient model held sway until about 200 years ago. Till that time, history and legend placed the origin of Greek civilization in Africa, specifically in Kemet or Egypt. According to Bernal, this story was held to be true by many classical authors, for example, Herodotus, Book 6, and was denied by none. Moreover, there is no ancient tradition of an invasive. Oh, sorry. Moreover, there is no ancient tradition of an invasion of Greece from the north. In Book 6 of his Histories, Herodotus wrote, well, how it happened that Egyptians came to the Peloponnese, and what they did to make themselves kings in that part of Greece has been chronicled by other writers. I will add nothing, therefore, but proceed to mention some points which no one else has yet touched upon. According to Bernal, a second model, the quote-unquote Aryan model, was invented at the Göttingen University by German and British professors. Without any new data, and in the teeth of the ancient writers, they proclaimed an Aryan origin of Grecian civilization. This was and still is without an empirical foundation. And so we have before us not merely the fact of a black presence in ancient Greece, but the possible fact that Kemetic Africa played a major creative role in the establishment of the cultural patterns that are uniquely thought of as Greek civilization. You know, let me just stop here. I remember in college, a professor was telling us, is it Herodotus? I can never remember who the Greek was, but there was a Greek guy who in Greece had like 2 written stories, had 2 books or 2 stories or whatever that he wrote. Went to Africa and came back with like 100 of them. Suddenly he had 100 stories, right? Or 100 books or whatever it was, right? These guys have been thieves for the longest. But again, if you understand their nature, right? Like we talked about with Nikki Wren a couple minutes back, right? The nature of these people, we don't study the nature of these people. When you study the nature of these people, you realize that's all they do. They're like dogs, right? Or wolves, or whatever they say their civilization comes from. That's what they're like. Cunning, conniving, stealing, raping, that's their thing. That's their jam. You know? So they don't care about numbers. They do that thing where, you know, it is whatever I say it is. Right? They don't need empirical data. Right? To continue. Where was I? And so we have before us not merely the fact of a black presence in ancient Greece, but the possible fact that Kemetic Africa played a major creative role in the establishment of the cultural patterns that are uniquely thought of as Greek civilization. Few black faces on remnants of pottery do not begin to tell the story. Black Africans were deeply involved in the lives of the Greeks. Right? Note the writings of Homer in the Iliad and the Odyssey. What may be more important than the presence and importance of black Africans in Greco-Roman antiquity is the story of how the knowledge of their certain presence and importance was lost. There are certain givens that can be derived from a fair study of the historical record. Right? There are certain givens that can be derived from a fair study of the historical records. Number one, it cannot be denied that African Kemetic or Egyptian civilization is older than the Greco-Roman by at least 2,000 years. And then this is the stuff, again, like, I can't stress it enough. This is the stuff that needs to be in the history books that we are writing. When I say we, I mean collectively as a people, as a race. This needs to be the stuff like in bold letters and within the first few pages of any history book that we're writing for our children to study. African Kemetic civilization, older than Greco-Roman, at least 2,000 years. At least 2,000 years. Number two, cannot be denied that many of the features that are identified as key elements in Greco-Roman civilization were well recorded in ancient African Kemetic civilizations long before either Greece or Rome existed. For example, consider the 18th dynasty temples at Waset or Luxor that are called Karnak, originally called Ipet, Isut, and Luxor, Southern Ipet temples. Compare these and even earlier Kemetic structures with the Parthenon and other later Greco-Roman colonnaded temples. Clearly, Kemet was first. Compare the ancient region of Asa, Osiris, Ast, Isis, and Heru, Horus, to early Greek and Roman religion, and even later to Greco-Roman Christianity. In fact, until the rise of organized Christianity, Kemetic religion was a major, if not the major religion of the Greco-Roman world. Yeah, when you hear about the Constantine and Nicaea and stuff like that, the religions that they were largely trying to crush was religions that came off of Kemetic religion. Even church people, I grew up in an Anglican church. Even church people, when they talk about Nicaea, right, and they talk about Constantine, and they talked about the pagans, that's a term that they use, right? This pagan this and pagan that. What that pagan word is really hiding is that a lot of that stuff the people were doing were African too. Wasn't just, whatever they were doing indigenously, but a lot of that was stuff that was brought in that was Kemetic in nature, right? It cannot be denied that Greece and Rome were in close geographical proximity to Africa, the birthplace of high civilization, right? Let me see the chat room. I see some activity. Kevin K reminds you guys to like, share, and subscribe. Help this channel grow. I appreciate that, Kevin K. Herodotus, Pythagoras, Hippocrates, all thieves. Nikki Wren says deceivers, etc. Kevin K says to Nikki Wren, truth. Kevin K goes on to say, I have a book on the cave paintings of North Africa. This is a long, time before even Egypt. It shows black people. He goes on to say there is a black man here in the USA. They did a test of him, and his DNA dates back almost 500,000 years ago. Isn't that the guy? Yeah, isn't that the guy who they say is like the direct relative of Eve or something like that? If you believe in that kind of thing, all right? Or perhaps mitochondrial Eve. Isn't that the same guy? I think there's a black guy with locks too, right? If memory serves me correctly. But to continue, in light of all of the above, why would it be necessary or even rational to be surprised at a black African presence in ancient Greece and Rome? Why have most scholars looked for Africans in Greece and Rome only as slaves when there's documentation to show more Africans as, number one, founders of Greece, number two, emperors of Rome, number three, popes in the early Christian church, and number four, models of civilization? Africa was the source of, is this a new section? The meaning of Kemet history. Africa was the source of two major forces that greatly affected the development of Europe. The first was the impact of Kemet during the first millennium BC. The second was the impact of the Moorish, inheritors of the Kemetic culture, invasion and settlement in southern Europe from 711 AD to 1492 AD. Evidence for the impact of these two contacts is pervasive and overwhelming. When a more truthful and rational world history is widely known, the distortions and blind spots of colonial historians will be sources of amusement. The quote-unquote loss of blacks in antiquity is due to defective theoretical historical paradigms, chauvinistic historians, the legacy of the distorted scholarship of white supremacist professors, the failure to rely upon primary data sources, the consequent repetition of popular historical error, and the failure to allocate resources for the investigation of questions appropriate to the rediscovery of Black people in antiquity. The influence of Black Africa's cultural antiquity is not limited to Europe, even to the African continent itself. Africans in antiquity are to be found in a diaspora that stretches in a band that reaches around the globe, especially around its equatorial regions. Historians have been too tentative and too cautious in describing Africa's place in world history. When this picture is drawn properly, Blacks in the antiquity of the infant civilizations of Greece and Rome will come as no great surprise. On the contrary, it would be a miracle if there were not the case. Brings us to a section called the uses of ancient Kemetic heritage. Civilization of ancient Kemet may seem remote to many African Americans in time, physical location, and in relationship to meaningful priorities for 1985 in the United States. This is when the paper was written, right? Yet there is an urgent need for African Americans to rescue and reconstruct this and other parts of all African heritage. As shown above, Kemet was an integral part of a culturally unified continent. It is because of Kemet's abundant records the best window in the dynamics of African culture generally. It is because of Kemet's abundant records the best window on the dynamics of African culture generally. That's a funny written sentence. African Americans and other Africans in the diaspora still retain some general African cultural norms. Therefore, it is wrong to consider African Americans as if their heritage is merely European, or as if all their African heritage has been obliterated. Well, certain people need to hear this more than others, right? The existence of advanced African cultural developments in antiquity, continental cultural unity, and diasporan cultural continuities may be of interest to many. However, it is the utility of these things that may be considered here. History and culture are ongoing creative processes that arise out of any group's struggle to survive. For African Americans, that struggle continues. As struggle continues, there are several clear uses for the cumulative and continuing history and culture of our people. Right? This is stuff that would be nice to get a clip of and share the clip around, right? Number one, the source of philosophy. In the face of an integrated ancient philosophical religious system, the parent of world systems, it would be foolish for its heirs to act in ignorance of it. There is no reason for heirs of African systems to be more impressed by the answers to questions given in their philosophical religious systems than they are with their own. You see, there's no reason for children of Africa, right, children of African systems, to be more impressed by the answers to questions given in other philosophical religious systems than they are with their own. That's why I can't take an African who's Christian seriously. Actually, correct that. I can't take an adult African who's Christian seriously. Or Muslim or whatever, seriously. Ideas about worldviews, metaphysics, knowledge views, epistemology, and value views, axiology, have been fully developed by African ancestors. They still contain avenues to truths that are worthy guides to mental and spiritual life. In fact, they have guided European thought through such institutions as churches and fraternal orders, such as the Masonic Order. I have some Masonic books that I've been thinking about putting up on the Discord. But I do believe most of them are from a European POV. If you guys who are here would be interested in them, let me know. I'll create a bookshelf called the Masonic, and you guys can check them out. So you guys let me know if you're interested in some Masonic order books, and I'll put them up if you are in the chat room. Kevin K42 says Hathor, the Kemetic goddess of love, was worshipped in ancient Greece and Rome. The Venus statues. Hathor is also the sister of Isis. Kevin K goes on to say European philosophy instead of philosophy is philosophy. He says, B.S. Peter Tosh said, a man of the past living in the present, walking in the future. That's well said. Well said. So let's go to the second given here. A foundation for group unity and identity. The destruction of group unity and identity is a precondition for the enslavement of people. The destruction of group unity and identity is a precondition for the enslavement of a people. The absence of group unity and identity reduces the power of the group and individuals within it. This is why, and even up to like today and all, I see people still talking the foolishness that Pan-Africanism is dead, right? But the reality of it is that if you think that it's dead, or if you want it to be dead, in fact, most of the people I see saying Pan-Africanism is dead are people who are really trying to say we're killing Pan-Africanism. Have y'all noticed that? On social media and stuff, when people are talking about, well, Pan-Africanism is dead, what they're really saying, if you read it for its true context, is that we, as Black Americans or whatever you are, we're killing Pan-Africanism. It's dead to us, right? And not realizing that the absence of a group unity and identity reduces the power of the group and individuals within it. You're reducing your own power. You still don't have the power that you need to have anyway, even with it. What do you think is going to happen without it? Group cohesion is a prerequisite to effective action. Group cohesion is rooted in shared culture, right? So you know what that kind of means too, that last part especially? It means that we really got to expand our culture. Right, at this point, when you consider what has happened to us through the Ma'afa, we need to expand our culture. We just can't be Caribbean. We just can't be Black American anymore. We can't just be continental African. We got to find those things that are more alike than different, and we need to expand upon it, and we need to really embrace it and build upon it more. That's how we're going to get the group cohesion. Right? That's how we're going to get the group cohesion. James Mensa is in the room. James Mensa is in the room. Do you guys click on the bell to be notified when I'm on? Because I've noticed it a couple of times now. Some of you come in like 10 minutes before I'm done. If you click on the bell, you'll be notified when I'm live. And if you join the Discord, we put the link in the room again. If you join the Discord, right? You will be notified, right? Those of you in the Discord know, you'll be notified when I'm on live. And you guys could hop on time. But again, these shows, right, for a small channel like this, these shows are much better, and I'm sure you guys can tell, those of you who've been here from the beginning, that these shows are much better when the chat room is rolling, right? When the chat room is rolling, these shows are much better. But make sure, click on the bell to be notified. But in saying that, to James Mensa, I'm going to say hello to you as well. I'm doing fine. I think a lot of folks in the room are doing fine. Kevin Care 42 says to James Mensa, great. How are you? Right? We're good, and I hope you're good as well. James Mensa said, yeah, I was coding. That is why. Right? Kevin Care 42 says Tariq does not live in the black community. KW Don 7 says Pan-Africanism is not dead, hasn't been fully embraced and tested. That's nothing but the truth. And frankly speaking, the Pan-Africanists haven't done the full extent of work they need to do. It's a failing on the Pan-Africanist part as well, as I've said before. Right? But if you listen to the people online who are talking about Pan-Africanism is dead, if you read the context of what they're saying, right, sufficiently, you'll see that what they're really saying is that they're killing Pan-Africanism, but we cannot have that. It's the group cohesion, right, that's going to give us, you know, that's going to make us effective, right? Kevin Careford, who says we are people of the godly ways. We make everything come to life. We are great people. KW Don 7 says the FBA ADOS is like a mouse trying to live in a snake pit. I agree. I agree. Nikki Wren says great. I'm not sure why Nikki Wren said, oh, I guess she means she's doing great based on James Mensa's question. All right. So yeah, so going forward, guys, let's try to have everyone here relatively on time so that you don't miss most of the show. And so, but I do appreciate you coming through, and I do appreciate you guys coming through. You guys make the show, you make this period of time that I'm presenting a paper just a wonderful time. James Mensa said the Pan-Africanists are part of the problem. He goes on to say they need to have skills that is evidently shown to the people. All right. You guys who are here with me today, what do you think? You could answer this in the chat room. What do you think Pan-Africanists need to do more of and less of? Right? What do you think they need to do more of? What do you think they need to do less of? You guys put that in the chat room. We'll discuss it at the end of the paper. A source of number 3, a source of resistance to alien domination. Cabral was astute in his recognition of the role of indigenous culture in the practice of freedom. He saw that only by the organized, systematic, and effective repression of a people's culture could a foreign or alien power dominate a native or culturally distinct population. It is for this reason that colonizers and oppressors all over the world have always declared war on ethnic culture. Conquerors are fully aware of the power of history and culture. History teaches us that in certain circumstances, it is very easy for the foreigner to impose his domination on a people. But it also teaches us that whatever may be the material aspects of this domination, it can be maintained only by the permanent, organized repression of the cultural life of the people concerned. Implantation of foreign domination can be assured definitively only by physical liquidation of a significant part of the dominated population. In fact, to take up arms to dominate a people is above all to take up arms to destroy, or at least neutralize, to paralyze its cultural life. But with a strong and indigenous cultural life, foreign domination cannot be sure of it perpetuation. All right. So one of the questions that came up on the show from the chat room a while back was, why does the U.S. have all of these like bases, right, in these countries, right? Like the U.S. has thousands of bases in countries that I can't even understand. Like, for example, why is there a base in Cuba? Right? How? I mean, how did that happen? Now, if you like me and you watched those old movies, like Vietnam movies and stuff like that as a kid, you'll see that like the soldiers tend to come and bring their culture. They bring baseballs and all this old shit. They're playing catch with kids, and that's where, you know, you start to give way of your culture to this dominating force, right? Do you guys remember those movies of like Korea and Vietnam and Japan and stuff, and the troops of the U.S. are in there and they're kind of quote unquote messing with these kids by bringing this American culture to the kids, and baseball cards and gum and all that type of shit? You know? Number 4, a basis for independence. Once freedom is won, it must be sustained. It is pitiful to see so many of those who have won their freedom, having paid a blood price for it, surrender their initiative and enter into voluntary cultural servitude. I love that phrase right there. Voluntary cultural servitude. A free person or group must have an independent conception of identity, purpose, and direction. The history and culture of African people provides a foundation for the construction of independent visions, no matter where the sons and daughters of Africa are. Let me read that last sentence again. I love it. The history and culture of African people provides the foundation for the construction of independent visions, no matter where the sons and daughters of Africa are. That's what I've been talking about for a while. Wherever there's African people, that's African land, right? Particularly in like the Caribbean and the continent, right? That's where you got to build, right? That's where you got to build. Number 5, a basis for creativity. Many African Americans are rightfully suspicious of romantic calls for a return to the past. Clearly, what is needed is reality, not romanticism in the contemporary world. Moreover, no return to the past is even possible for everyone. Yet one's own past can and must be used in the present as building material for the future. Real romanticism appears when the misguided African American people try to build their futures out of the alien heritage of others, as if it were their own. Right? Real romanticism appears when misguided African American people try to build their futures out of the alien heritage of others, as if it was their own. What do you guys think about that last sentence? Well, what do you think ASA Hilliard is saying in that last sentence? I get the general idea for, you know, the concept in, you know, number 5, right? But is ASA denying, is ASA calling Africa the alien heritage? Or are they referring to the American and African American as the alien heritage? Sometimes the way things are written can confuse people. What do you think that last sentence means? The use of one's past is not a rejection of technological creativity. It may help to put technology into perspective and to shape it. To know one's past is not to live in the past or to be stymied in the present. The past contains the seeds for the future. We check in with the chat room before we hit the conclusion here. the mic. Yeah, so Nikki Rand said, yes, I'm doing great. So James Mensa, to finish his thought, said they need to have skills that's evidently shown to the people, referring to the Pan-Africanists, so that the people will adhere to Pan-Africanism. Nikki Rand says, yes, I'm doing great. KW Don 7 says, more institution building and less rhetoric. I agree. We got to see stuff. We got to be able to touch it, to feel it, right? Like one of the most glaring things from Pan-Africanism, and I'm looking at you, the continent, is setting up systems where we could travel cheaper, right, as sons and daughters of the continent, back to, parts of the continent, right? Where are our systems? What's the Jews call it again? Not the return. What's it called? I forgot the name, but we need to have something similar, right? And that's something that we got to be actively talking about. We need, see, the thing is always about visibility too. That's what I talked about last time. We can't be hiding all the time, right, to do stuff. Certain things we have to be very visible. We need leaders in the continent to talk to the leaders in, elsewhere, right? And start openly talking about, yo, look, we need to have the right to return, right? We need to have the right to return for our people, and this is what we can do. What can you guys do on the other side of it? How can we bring this together? We got to have stuff like the right to return for our children and for our people to go back to the continent and see where your people came from. We have to be visible in a lot of aspects. We can't always be hiding. KW Don says more. Okay. Kevin Care 42 says uplift and prepare the youth and give more young people a chance. James Mensa tells us he'll be right back. I'm still coding. Okay. All right. All right. Kevin Care 42 says the white savior movies. Yeah, talking about those Korean and European war movies where they show the white guys playing catch with the indigenous kids and stuff like that. James Mensa, I guess he's back from coding, says indigenous cultural life is important, but it has to evolve as time goes on, or people will go to the enemy. Case in point, feminism. That's true. He goes on to say the failure of Pan-Africanism, including women, played a part of them adopting feminism. Kevin Care 42 says less Mickey Mouse philosophy, more African philosophy. Nikki Wren is here. Nikki Wren says the Pan-Africanists should do more action in accomplishing their objectives. Needs to do less talking. The older generation needs to allow the younger generation to learn so that they can take over. I agree. There's a certain point where you got to retire your claim. You had leadership claims. This idea where you become a dictator and die as a dictator, that's just foolishness. There's a time when you take the reins, you control, you guide the ship, or you guide the animal. The direction needs to be guided. You let youth come in, youth that you've prepared, that you've educated. You let them come in and take it from there. We got to stop having this thing where people die out, and so that's the end. That's the end of a direction because the person got old and died. Nikki Rand goes on to say we need more cohesion, Pan-Africanists, more action to show that Pan-African is the solution to overcome it. Absolutely. Thank you all for those answers. I appreciate it. You can continue to comment as I continue to finish reading the conclusion. But that's absolutely right. We got to start, again, we got to do our parts wherever we are. On the continent needs to raise the efforts. Pan-Africanism on the continent a lot of times seems to be countries on the continent practicing Pan-Africanism, but there's more of us out here in the world, right? Yes, ultimately, it's probably the case that we need to all return. But practically speaking, you won't get everyone to return. What are you going to do in lieu of it? right? What are you going to do with the African satellite countries, known as the Caribbean, right? We got to start meeting people where they are. We have to start building and letting things be visible to everyone, right? That we're doing what we're doing. Again, some things you move in silence, some things you got to be bold and do it so that the misguided people can look up and see what's going on and start to be guided. You see? This brings us to the conclusion of the paper. A computer without a memory is dysfunctional, even though it has available a sophisticated program. The program simply would have nothing to process. People without a memory or with a false memory is a disabled people. They have nothing to process, or more likely, they have garbage to process. Y'all put underdog, put that on a t-shirt. Right? People without memory or with a false memory is a disabled people. They have nothing to process, or more likely, they have garbage to process. For too long, African Americans have been deprived of a true history. This means functioning without a vital asset that any people requires. The rescue and reconstruction of Kemetic history is but one small part of what should be a grand design for the rescue and reconstruction, the full picture. That's what the curriculum that we always talk about is. A grand design for the rescue and reconstruction of the full picture. The culturally disarmed cannot stand as pairs in a culturally armed world. Underdog, you know what to do. Put that on a t-shirt. Culturally disarmed cannot stand as pairs in a culturally armed world. All right. Some reason, oh yeah, they put the references in text. I forgot. All right. Some of these papers I'm going to start reading as well. I like these. I like the references to papers like this. We're going to bring some of those old papers back in future readings. What did you guys think of the paper? Talking to the chat room, what did you guys think of the paper? I'm going to take a station ID break real quick as you guys formulate your opinions about the paper, and then I'll read those opinions when I get back on the other side.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
That's right. And also check out the Queen's Council podcast as well. By the way, if you're here, do me a favor. Go over to KWAZ Radio. Let's go over to their channel. Right? Go over to their channel and subscribe to their channel as well. Right? We have to start to get the numbers up there for some of the things that we're trying to do in the future. Okay? Do me that favor. Go over there. Subscribe to KWZ Radio. Right? And you could click on KWZ Radio in the chat room, for example. Go over there, subscribe to them, and let's get that channel, let's get the numbers up on that channel so we could get certain things popping over there as well. In the chat room, I see folks are saying educational. That's Kevin Care 42. Nikki Ren is saying, yep, educational. And you know, that's really the hope of this show, to always be providing educational content that you could chew on, that you could come up with your own ideas and theories, that you could come back into the group with and discuss with me in the group. And like I said, KWAZ Radio just posted the Discord link. Join the Discord if you haven't already. Let's discuss more ideas there. Let's get a lot more stuff going on there as well. All right, guys, that's been the episode of the show today. I want to thank everyone. Let me see if I can remember everyone who hopped on. I want to thank Kevin Care42. You already know that. I want to thank Nikki Wren. I want to thank James Bensa. I guess he's coding somewhere right now. Of course, I got to thank KW Don 7. Who was it who popped in and said they only pop in every once in a while, but they're around? Grand Pooba. Thank you to Grand Pooba as well. And for anyone who was remaining silent in the background, I still thank you as well for being here. I appreciate you guys. I'll see you guys on Saturday. I hope to have a great show on Saturday for you guys as well. All right? Peace, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.